The sky was the wrong color when Mara first noticed the ships. Not ships the way anyone who grew up near an ocean would recognize. Not the slow drag of tankers on a gray horizon. Not the bright triangles of sails. These were geometries the eye refused to resolve. Objects that hung in the stratosphere like wounds in fabric, massive and absolutely still. Mara had been standing on the concrete dock of the Lindeman Island ferry terminal, with her father's duffel bag on one shoulder and her daughter, Pell's hand in her other, when she looked up and felt her stomach drop out of her body. She didn't scream. She just stopped. Pell looked up at her mother's face and then at the sky and said, "Mom." "I know," Mara said. "That was 4 days ago." The island had seemed like the right call. When the phenomenon hit the mainland, the broadcast used that word, phenomenon, in the careful tone of people who had agreed not to say the word they were actually thinking. The roads out of the city had become rivers of metal and heat and panic. Mara's father, Dex, had called her from the island where he'd been caretaking a seasonal property since March. He'd said, "Come." He'd said, "It's quiet here." He'd said the ferry was still running. He was 71 years old and had a bad hip, and he used the word phenomenon the same careful way the broadcasters did. But when she heard his voice, she had packed Pell's bag first, and then her own, and she had not once questioned the decision until they were on the water and the ferry slowed and she saw the shape of the island in the late afternoon light and understood that it was very small. The property was an old sea research station that had been converted into a private retreat at some point in the 1990s. It sat on the north end of the island's single hill, behind a stand of weather-bent pines, looking out over an expanse of North Atlantic that today was the color of hammered pewter. There were 4 buildings, a main house, a utility shed, a long low structure that had once been a specimen storage facility, and a generator shack that Dex visited every morning the way some men visit a garden. When Mara arrived, he was standing on the dock in his old waxed jacket, thinner than she remembered, his white hair doing what it always did in sea wind. He had pulled Pell into a hug that lasted a long time, and over his granddaughter's shoulder his eyes had found Mara's and said everything that needed saying. They had spent the first day listening to the emergency broadcasts. They had spent the second day watching the sky. On the third day, the thing came ashore. It arrived in the cove below the property at approximately 0300, and what woke Mara was not a sound but an absence of sound. The island's ambient noise, the insects and the wind rock of the pines, and the intermittent calling of shearwaters, had simply stopped. She lay in the dark with her eyes open for 3 seconds, and then she was moving. She had been a logistics coordinator for a coastal emergency management office before all this. People sometimes assumed the job was administrative, which it partly was, and partly it was the kind of work where you learned that the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic one was almost always a question of the first 90 seconds. What you did before you knew what was happening. She reached Pell's room and had the girl up and dressed and into the main corridor before she was fully conscious. And she had her hand over Pell's mouth gently and said, "Quiet. Good. With me." Dex was already in the kitchen. He'd heard it too. "The cove," he said. "Yeah." He had the old shotgun from the utility shed, which they both knew was probably meaningless, and neither of them said so. He looked at her with an expression she had seen exactly once before in her life. The morning of her mother's last night in the hospital. And she thought, he's deciding something. He's already decided. "Take her to the specimen building," he said. "The walls are 18-inch poured concrete. Built in 1962. Dad, that wasn't a request, Mara. You know how to do this." She did know how to do this. That was the problem and the gift of it both. She took Pell's hand and moved. The specimen building had a single door that bolted from the inside with a bar mechanism that was older than Mara and had the solidity of something that had never been asked to do anything and was quietly confident it could do everything. She dropped it into the bracket in the dark and pressed her back against the wall beside the door and held Pell against her chest. Pell was 9 years old, and in the hierarchy of things Mara was proudest of in her life, the fact that Pell didn't cry right now was near the top. "Is it one of the ones from the ships?" Pell whispered. "I don't know. Is Grandpa?" "He knows this island better than anything alive," Mara said, and believed it. They waited. The thing that found them was not loud. That was what she hadn't expected, having spent 72 hours constructing a mental image from fragments of broadcast that described chaos and destruction and mass evacuation. She had expected something that announced itself. Instead, it moved through the exterior world with a quality she could only describe later as attention, slow, systematic. The sound of it not violent but searching, like something working through a problem. She heard the utility shed door pulled from its hinges, not smashed but simply removed. She heard the main house door give way with a sound like a held breath released. She heard the generator shack's metal wall sing a single resonant note. Then silence. Then something pressed against the specimen building door. It didn't force it. It applied pressure in an exploratory way, the same way you might push a door you weren't sure was locked, checking. The bar held. The pressure increased fractionally, then held steady, and she had the distinct impression that whatever was on the other side was thinking. Beside her, Pell had gone absolutely still. Mara thought about her father. She thought about the waxed jacket, the white hair, the bad hip he never mentioned. She thought about the way he'd looked at her across the kitchen, and decided something she hadn't been allowed to argue with. She thought about her mother's last night. She reached up in the dark and found the small panel on the wall she'd noticed when they came in. She'd been a logistics coordinator. She noticed things like emergency panels and ran her fingers across it by touch. Circuit breaker housing, main power cutoff for the building, and beside it, what she'd thought when she first saw it was a generator interface toggle. It wasn't a generator interface. The specimen building had been a research station in 1962, the height of the Cold War, on a North Atlantic island, and whoever had built it had also installed a ULF antenna array in the concrete ceiling designed to communicate with submarines. The toggle was a transmission gate. She had no idea what frequencies it still broadcast on. She had no idea if it would do anything. She had spent 36 hours thinking about it in the back of her mind the way she thought about all contingency options. Ranking them, pricing them, waiting to see if the day came when they moved up the list. She thought, this is information I have, and the thing outside this door does not have. That's the only asymmetry available to me. The only question is whether I can use it before the door gives way. She told Pell to cover her ears, then she threw the toggle. The sound was subsonic, a pressure more than a frequency, and it moved through the concrete walls, and through the floor, and through every cell of every body in range. Mara felt it in her back teeth and her sternum and the bones of her ankles. Pell made a small pained sound despite the ear covering. On the other side of the door, whatever was pressing against it stopped. Not retreated, stopped. Like something interrupted mid-thought. Mara held the toggle open and waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The pressure against the door did not return. She thought about Dex. She thought he knew. He had lived on this island for 3 months, and he had walked every inch of it, and he had read the records of the research station the way he read everything he was responsible for, which was thoroughly and without assumption. He had said the walls were 18-inch poured concrete. He had not said anything about the antenna. He hadn't needed to. He'd put her in the building that had the thing she'd need, trusted her to find it, and gone to do the other thing that needed doing. She didn't know, in that moment, whether he was alive. She thought about the face he'd made across the kitchen table. She threw the toggle 3 more times in a pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Because she was her father's daughter, and she had been trained to establish communication before she had been trained to do anything else. The silence outside lasted another 3 minutes. Then she heard him knock on the door. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. She pulled the bar and opened it, and there he was, in the gray pre-dawn, his waxed jacket torn at the shoulder. A long abraded mark across the right side of his face that would leave a scar, the shotgun gone. He was breathing in the specific way of a man who has been running on a bad hip and will not mention it. Pell hit him at approximately 30 miles an hour, and he caught her without staggering. There's more than one, he said, over the top of Pell's head. Found that out the hard way. I figured, Mara said. The antenna? Still active. Whatever they are, they don't like it. The one at the door stopped. He nodded slowly. She had seen that nod before. It was the nod of a man recalculating, updating, building a new plan on top of the wreckage of the first one. Ran one of them toward the north cliff. It followed me. Went off the edge into the cove. I don't know if that kills them, but it stopped it. Temporarily. He looked at the antenna housing inside the door, then at her. You're thinking about range. The array is probably rated for deep water communication. If the transmission is strong enough, It's a 1962 transmitter, Mara. The wiring is 60 years old. I know. If you push that much current through it and it's degraded, it will burn out the housing, maybe the whole board. One big transmission versus intermittent ones, she said. We set the pattern, we draw them in, we hit them all at once, and hope the range is sufficient. He looked at her with the particular expression she'd only seen from him twice in her life. The first time had been at her college graduation when he'd thought she wasn't looking. The second was right now. You got a better idea? She said. No, he said. I don't. They spent 40 minutes preparing. Mara stripped the secondary wiring from every electrical device in the building. The emergency lanterns, the old refrigeration unit, the wall-mounted intercom, and Dex, who had been an electrical engineer for 20 years before his retirement, used them to add a second path to the antenna circuit, bypassing the corroded primary conduit. His hands were completely steady. Pell, who had inherited Mara's capacity for stillness under pressure and Dex's interest in how things worked, held the flashlight and passed connectors when asked and did not speak unless spoken to. At one point, Dex looked at his granddaughter, holding the light with both hands, her face serious and her small jaw set. And Mara saw something cross his face that she filed away for later. When this goes, he said, it will either work or the building loses all power. Or it works and the building loses all power, Mara said. That is also possible. He looked at Pell. You know that game you used to play with your mother, the finding game, when she hid things around the house. Pell nodded. I need you to remember exactly where every door in this building is. Both exit routes. Which direction each one faces. In complete dark, could you get to them? Pell thought about it. Yes, you sure? I walked them, Pell said. When we came in. I always walk the room. Mara looked at her daughter. Dex looked at Mara, and the thing on his face was unambiguous now. Ready? Mara said. He nodded. She opened the door. The pre-dawn island lay still under a sky that was beginning to come apart at the eastern edge. A faint bruised light rising over the water. She could see 3 of the geometries from here, lower than they'd been 2 days ago, and the air smelled wrong. Not the clean salt cold she'd come to associate with this place, but something underneath it. A charge, a wrongness that sat in the back of the throat. Movement on the south path, then the north tree line. One emerged from the direction of the main house, moving in that same attentive, systematic way. Not fast, not slow, completely deliberate. She left the door open. She came back inside. She looked at Dex. Transmitting, she said, and threw the toggle all the way to the stop, held it there, and held it. The sound was not the same as before. It was larger. It was the feeling of the building pressing outward from the inside, the concrete trying to breathe, the floor vibrating in a frequency that lived just below the threshold of hearing. The emergency lanterns had already gone dark. Pell had moved to the wall between the 2 exit doors and planted her feet. Outside, something stopped. Then something else stopped. Then the sound she hadn't heard yet but had been dreading. Multiple simultaneous stoppages, overlapping, the silence of things interrupted. The transmitter ran for 11 seconds before the board gave way. The building went dark and silent. Mara held herself against the wall in the complete black and counted. At 30, she said quietly, Pell. South door, Pell said from the dark. 3 meters, clear path. At 60, Dex said, going to check. Wait, Mara. She didn't say anything. The bar lifted. The door opened. Gray dawn entered the building along with cold salt air. Dex stood in the doorway for a long moment. Come look, he said. She came. The 3 geometries on the southern horizon were moving, for the first time in 4 days. Not toward the island, but away from it. Rising slowly with the indifferent grace of things that are very large and are done with a place. On the path to the south, 15 meters away, something lay crumpled that she chose not to examine closely. In the direction of the north tree line, nothing moved. The bruised light on the eastern water was spreading now, going gold at the edge. Pell came and stood between them and put one hand in Mara's and one in Dex's. They stood like that for a while without saying anything. Mara was thinking about the transmitter board, the pattern of failures she'd have to work around to get it operational again. The question of what frequencies might work a second time, and whether the things in the ships learned and adapted, and how quickly. She was thinking about the ferry. She was thinking about what the mainland looked like, and whether her contacts in emergency management were still reachable, and what kind of coordination would be possible. She was also thinking about nothing, just the light, just the cold, just her daughter's hand in one of hers and her father's hand in the other. Dex said, "You built that circuit in 38 minutes. You taught me how circuits work." "I taught you the theory," he said. That was not theory. She looked sideways at him. The abraded mark on his face had dried and stopped bleeding. His eyes were on the water and the retreating shapes, calculating the same things she was calculating. "They'll come back," she said. "Eventually. We need to reach the mainland, find out what worked and what didn't, pool the data. Yes. The antenna array is probably repairable if the primary board is intact. I'll need parts, but there's an electronics cache in the utility shed if it wasn't destroyed." "It wasn't." She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I put it there last week," he said, "when I was thinking about what you'd need." The light was fully gold now. Pell said, "Are they gone for good?" Neither adult answered immediately, which was itself an answer, which Pell was old enough to understand. "Not gone for good," Mara said, "but gone for now. And we know something now that we didn't know yesterday." "The sound," Pell said. "The sound." Pell nodded, with the specific gravity of a 9-year-old who is keeping up and knows it. She squeezed both their hands once, then released them, and went to sit on the concrete step of the building and watch the shapes diminish on the horizon with the unsentimental focus of someone cataloging information for future use. Mara watched her daughter watch the sky. She thought about the word phenomenon, the careful way everyone had been using it. She thought about the transmitter board, and the secondary wiring, and 38 minutes, and the look on her father's face. She thought about the three of them in the dark, in the 1962 concrete building on the small island in the cold Atlantic, with no weapons and no communications and no rescue incoming. Nothing but what they knew and what they could build from what was on hand. She thought, this is how it goes. Not the speeches, not the last stands, not the dramatic declarations of what humanity is and what it will not surrender. Just this. A woman in the dark throwing a toggle she found because she notices things. A man with a bad hip running an enemy off a cliff edge with no thought of himself. A 9-year-old holding a flashlight with both hands and knowing the way out by heart. Dex came and stood beside her. "Cold," he said. "Yeah, generator's probably salvageable. I'll have a look." "Okay." He started toward the generator shack, limping slightly, already calculating what tools he'd need. He didn't look back, but she watched him go until he disappeared around the corner of the building. Then she went to sit beside Pell on the step. Her daughter leaned against her shoulder, still watching the horizon, and they sat together in the gold, cold morning while the shapes on the weir got smaller, and the sea moved the way it had always moved, indifferent to all of it, and the island's sounds began to return. The wind, the pines, the distant calling of the shearwaters, until the silence that had preceded the thing in the night was replaced once more by the sound of a world that was very damaged and still, stubbornly, continuing. In the generator shack, something clanged once, then hummed. The lights in the main house came on,